Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I have Martin Rafferty here with us today. How you doing, Martin?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing great. Back on a Monday, ready to rock and roll.
The weather here is nice and sunny, which being in Oregon, that's not always a given. So I'm ready as well.
So you're based out of Oregon?
Yes, Eugene, Oregon, to be specific. Go Ducks.
Go Ducks! I hear you. You say go Ducks. I say go Bucks. Yeah. Where are you from? Where were you raised at?
All over, but I'm originally from Ashland, Kentucky.
Okay. What was it like growing up in Kentucky?
So I actually grew up mostly not in Kentucky, but the few years that I did, because our family moved around a lot. Kentucky is there's a culture there that people don't expect, and that culture is of like back busting work and like having pride in being decent, and so I think people are surprised when they go there and they see that because it's not something that's really portrayed in the media.
Okay, all right. Tell me, what was elementary school like for you?
So, we had to move. I went to maybe 8 or 9 different elementary schools, right?
Okay.
So we moved several times a year. So for me, it was about learning how to make connections rapidly because next month or the month after, I might not be there. So I had to learn really quickly how to connect quickly. And so that meant being a class clown for me, unfortunately, right?
All right.
And being the number one enemy of the teacher. That being said, I had teachers who loved me and got me excited about poetry, and so I had some good moments.
Wow. Okay, and may I ask, why were you all moving so much?
Sure. So, and just like a content warning, my family experienced a lot of domestic violence. My stepfather would win my biological mom back. I was adopted at 11, but before then, she would move us to another city. He would move there as well, kind of win her back, and then the cycle would start over again, and we'd move to another city, and he'd do the same thing. So that happened basically from the age of 4 to the age of 9 before I moved to Oregon. We moved to Oregon, and he didn't follow.
Okay. I'm glad that you all were able to get into a safer situation. It sounds like, early on you all were from place to place just trying to keep everybody safe.
Yeah, I remember a lot of stayed in South Carolina, Georgia, and we were in like a battered home for domestic violence survivors, and I remember like seeing a UFO there with like the other women that were there, and I remember one moment when I was trying to play on the piano and I couldn't play the piano, and I was so sad when they're like, you can't play the piano anymore, and I'm like, why? And they're like, because you have to know how to play the piano to play it. I'm like, how am I supposed to learn how to play the piano? And so I have happy moments and there are dark moments too. Me and my sister was 2 years older than me, but she bore a brunt of the abuse. And as a young man, culture tells you that you're supposed to be the protector. And so I have some moments. I remember back in those days where I tried to be the protector, but I couldn't outthink this guy, right? And so, but it pressured me to not allow myself to give up when things got hard. I had to for my sister, I had to figure out what I could do. Rapid reattempts at new approaches until something would work.
Wow. So what do you think it was that inspired you to take on this protector sort of mentality? How did you take that on?
I remember thinking when I was very young, like 6 or 7, because he's deceased now. But my stepfather was a middle school science teacher. And our school was like next to theirs, so he was kind of like in the same building. And we would go to school, we'd have bruises, it would be kind of obvious. And I remember thinking, like, why isn't anyone coming to help us? And I think at some point I realized, like, no one was coming to help us or save us. And so if that was true, then that meant, I love my sister and I have to figure out a way to protect her. And so there's no other choice. There's no other option.
So you had a instinctive courage, if you will.
Yeah, a responsibility that, I needed to become the force that could counteract, the force that was like hurting my sister. After it was the kind of abuse that happened to her was different than my abuse. I didn't understand that at the time. And so for weeks afterwards, she would be in this really dark place. And so it was very extreme. I knew that whatever was happening was very wrong and that I had to do something about it.
How old were you at this time?
This was between 4 and 8.5 or 9. We moved to Oregon when I was either 8.5 or 9.
Okay. So, wow, that was a tough 5 years of your formative years there.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
At what point, if any, did Children's Services get involved?
They never did.
Mm.
And I know now why. I had no idea back then. But the system is broken, and instead of having investigations and putting like the safety of youth, as the highest priority, we are allowing ourselves, we look the other way, we avert our eyes, and the system's so massively broken. I mean, as a service provider now, there are situations, and not so much in Oregon. Oregon's system's really good, but we work with, we have staff in 5 different states, and we work all across the country. And what I see time and time again is that, people, the system's so overwhelmed, and there's not really any strong voices that are going, this is completely unacceptable. So it's the same thing. The system never got involved. I mean, my adoption story is just as outrageous as any you've probably ever heard. But it wasn't because the system stepped in.
My heart breaks for you when you say that no one ever stepped in, and you were going day in and day out, knowing that not only were you hurt, but your sister was hurt. I can identify with that pain. That is a very deep-seated problem that you were dealing with. And I'm wondering, how is it that no one noticed, and how is it that nobody stepped in? I mean, teachers were probably reporters to some degree, even back then. And if you're in school with bruises on you, I'm thinking, why did you have to go years or even months, days, going through this level of abuse or neglect that nobody noticed? I think that's absolutely terrible.
And it's worse when you consider the fact that, and I was a kid, and so it's hard for me to say this with 100% certainty but I'm sure there were times that we both came to school, right? Because he worked in the same building, and we both showed bruises. And although I can't say that 100%, I can say that over a year period, there were explainable bruises that were on each of us individually. So if you're a teacher who's concerned and watching, you go, oh, here's the brother. He has this weird bruise. Is that abuse? Probably not. But then a month later, you see the sister. Well, she has this weird bruise too. Like, you think back to the brother and go, maybe I'm gonna make a call. To give them the benefit of the doubt, though, he was their coworker as well, right? And so, what are you're gonna call DHS on your coworker?
Right.
So yeah, it's complicated but unacceptable as well, right?
Yeah, unacceptable. We have to protect the children at all costs. And while somebody might be a coworker, you still can't act different about a certain kid or a certain couple kids. But that adds some context, knowing that he was somebody's coworker who would have been a mandated reporter. Now, how did this mold you into the person that you are today in terms of resiliency and in terms of leadership?
So, those years, the physical domestic violence that I suffered and the psychological position I was in during those years, it must have stopped the part of my brain that ever thought that run, there's like the fight or flight response. Mm-hmm. And I think when that kind of violence is in the home that early, you go to one side of those and you stay, at least for me, I'm speaking for me, I can't speak for anyone else. I stayed on the fight response and I never learned how to fly. I never learned how to run. And so that kind of passion I took in with me because, how I got adopted was a story about someone breaking the rules. And like, why are they breaking the rules? Because the system's so fundamentally bad that if someone didn't break the rules, that I would have ended up dead, and if I wouldn't have been adopted, I wouldn't be here right now. Like, that is 100% accurate. And so for me, I had to learn that being a disruptor is the only way forward sometimes. And so I think I was system weary. I didn't trust the system. And so you pair that with that fighting attitude that I had. And then you pair that with, like, I felt like I had a debt. I was adopted by a social worker and my sister wasn't.
Before we get into that, I want to know, when did you start to engage with the system?
So the first time I engaged in the system was after, I'd spent in Oregon. I was, so I suppose that during those years when the domestic violence was happening, we engaged in the domestic violence system as far as like getting resources at shelters. But I was not I was under my biological mom's care at that point. And so I didn't know anything to do with that, except I couldn't play the piano. Apparently they made a new policy about that. But I guess at around the age of 11 is when I had my first system involvement.
Okay. And for those viewers out there who might not know, when you say system, you're talking about the child welfare system.
No, actually, so the homeless and runaway youth system. So I was in homeless residential at the age of 11 for a period of time.
Homeless residential, what's that?
Yeah, so there's in Oregon, there are youth that are taken on as wards of the state when DHS has found that their families aren't a safe place. My biological mother was mentally ill, and she did whatever she could to prevent that from happening. So I had to run away onto the streets, and I was homeless for months before I actually even started into a residential program for homeless youth.
How old were you when you were homeless on the streets?
11.
At 11 years old, you were homeless on the streets in Oregon?
For 4 months.
What was that like?
It was mixed. Mixed because for me, like, living with someone who is constantly like mentally destructive. My biological mom was dealing with opioid drug addiction, and that was on top of her mental health, and so it was hell, right? Living with her was hell. And so when I came home one day, and there was a sign on my door, and it basically said, "This isn't your home anymore." And wow. So I like got into my room and I got my stuff, and I was like, all right, from this day, she claims that like she didn't kick me out. But so if you want to say that I was kicked out or I ran away, I went to a place where we had lived in the city next over, which it's one city. We call it two different cities, but they're right next to each other, Eugene and Springfield. Okay. And I lived under this big bush that was by a freeway that we used to play in when I lived there. So there was some kind of shelter. I thought maybe because it was summer when this happened, I thought maybe like it would protect from the rain. Once September hit, got really cold. I was very hungry a lot. The free lunch program we had free lunch in the parks. And so I remember like when I figured that out, that I could eat there, that was a godsend. And but after a few months of that, you know, it was when the rain started in September, I remember being so hungry and cold that I kind of thought I was going to die. And
you're 11 years old.
Yeah.
Where's your sister at this time?
I think she lives in Arizona.
Okay. So you've been separated from your sister. You're probably your number one person in the world.
Yeah, at the time.
And you're sleeping under a bush.
Yeah.
So where's the system?
So part of it was that my last interaction with the system was my school, and I had a school counselor that I still keep in touch with today. Her name's Sue Tuchel. She saved my life, and she went to bat for me against my biological mom. Wanted me locked up in a mental health residential program called the Farm Home, which was like demonized. And it's like, you know, it's like, we're going to send you to the farm home. And it's like, it wasn't like we're going to send you somewhere to get help. It's like, we're going to send you to hell. Right.
We're going to punish you.
Yes, we're going to punish you, which is not a good thing to do if you're trying to get youth help, which is what the Farm Home does. Now as an adult, I know that what my biological mom did was she used it to like terrorize me. Wasn't their marketing, obviously. But my school counselor tried to stand up for me, and my biological mom convinced me that she was going to get her fired. And so I believed that if I went and got help from any of the adults that I knew, that my biological mom was going to come for them. And so that's how I stayed out there alone for so long. The only services I received during those months was that free lunch program. And if they would have known that I was homeless, they would have tried, I think, to bring me to the youth shelter that I eventually went to. But yeah.
But you were, in a sense, you were thinking about all the moving parts in your life. You were thinking about your mother. You were thinking about the fact that if you just outright asked for help, that your mother might possibly go and attack these people.
Yeah. And, you know, I believed everything she told me, right? And like, there's no way she could have gotten anyone fired. I know that now, but back then, like, I loved Sue Tuchel. Like, I'm not going to put Sue Tuchel's job on the line to fight, and no one can beat my biological mom, is my perspective back then.
Yep.
And so I wasn't going to put other people at risk.
Mm-hmm. So when did things start to change for you?
So it was one of those nights in September, very cold, very wet, very hungry. And I made the decision. There was this youth group leader. I went to this group called, before I was homeless, I went to this group called LEAD. It was a low-income leadership development group for low-income youth.
Okay.
And one time, the woman who ran that group, she they brought us on like rafting trips and like did this, like these things we never would have gotten to do. And one time after one of these rafting trips, while we were taking the rafts back to like this city center, we stopped at Madge's house. Her name is Madge, the director of this program, so she can grab something. And so like I kind of remembered Madge being, Madge had an interaction with my biological mom And my biological mom in this meeting went kind of like was threatening her. And I remember like Madge was like not shaken at all. And so I was like, I can't do this anymore. I need help. Like I really thought I was going to die. I really thought that. And so I went, it was nighttime. It gets dark here in Oregon at like 6 o'clock in the winter. And I knocked on her door and no one answered. And I started to walk away and she answered the door. She had just like, she was in a robe. She had just gotten out of the shower. Like, you know what would have happened to me if she would have decided not to answer the door? Like, how many times have you gotten out of the shower to answer the door, right? You like, you're like whatever, right?
Usually, right.
And no, but this is like now we don't have cell phones. Like everyone doesn't have a cell phone back then, right? I
What
definitely.
year was this? What year was this?
This was 2000 and 2000.
Okay.
Maybe?
Okay.
I don't really know what year. Somewhere around there.
Gotcha.
I'd have to do the math. I'm very bad at math, by the way. It's something to do about jumping schools too much.
Right.
But she answered the door and she was like, where have you been? Because she had known that like I had ran away. And so she brought me in. She fed me. And she called her people at this local youth shelter and took me there. And we started this process. At the time, I had stayed there. I think I was there the longest. I think I was the longest, like, because they had a process of like trying to get youth in and get them out relatively quickly. So I was there for months, and I think maybe the longest at the time. And when it was obvious that my biological mom was going to block any like resolutions, and Station 7, the shelter, was going to discharge me, she was like, I'm going to take you home if you'd like that. And I'm like, okay, like, sign me up. And so I had to live in secret until I was 16 with her.
Well, really? What do you mean by that?
So she didn't legally adopt me until I was 18. But until I was 16, at 16, that's the youngest you're allowed to be legally emancipated, right? I went in front of a judge and told my story, and he gave me, the rights. And so at the age of 16, when I had, because the fear is that my biological mom would come and like make allegations. Like she had made allegations against Madge to my siblings. And so it was very evident that like, if anyone knew that I was living with Madge, that like officially, because they thought maybe, right, that they would make these allegations and that Madge would lose her job or her career. And so from when I got to her to the age of 16 until I could legally be emancipated, and then my biological mom had no right to say anything. None of my friends could know where I lived. The high school that I went to, they had to pull strings to make it work. And so, yeah, I had to live in secret.
So your first 14 years here were all about saving your own life.
I would say that although the stakes were really high, when I got to Madge, like about 90% of my hell was over. Sorry for the language, but 90% of all of the trauma was over, right? And so I'm not saying it was easy to go to school every day and know that like maybe my biological mom hired a private detective, and so like I get real paranoid about like if anyone's following me home, or like my friends would be like, hey, like, why can't we ever come over to your house? And why can't we talk to your mom? And like, I had to lie to them. And my best friend, he was my best friend for years. And finally I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't lie to him anymore. And so like I told him, I'm like, I'm living with someone, and if someone finds out that I'm living with them, it could ruin their career.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, why didn't you just tell me that? Like,
Right.
But that was hard, but it was nothing compared to, everything that led up to that. I mean, Madge, the woman who adopted me, she would read me to sleep every night. So she was very loving, and she had a background in youth development to know exactly how to work with a traumatized youth. And so like she was God's prayer answered, right? She was my prayer answered. And so from 11 on, I've had it pretty easy compared to up until 11, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want to take this time out to just thank and to honor all the heroes out there who decide to be a positive person in a young person's life. When you see a young person who might be living in peril, you see the bruises on them, you see their clothing, you see the unhappiness on their face, and you see the sadness in their soul, and you decide to reach out to them and be there for them. I want to commend you today, whether you watch this episode today or anytime in the future. I want to say thank you, and I appreciate you, and certainly Martin, I'm sure, appreciates you too.
Yeah, there's no, it's so hard to make that phone call. Like we're mandatory reporters, and we train people to do that, and like no one wants to be wrong about something like that. But the truth is like children have no other protection besides these people sometimes. And so the people like that, the people like Madge, who like stand up and take that pain upon themselves, like you're taking it off of the young person and bringing it upon herself. She like, when she opened that door that night to me, she took all the risk that was on me and she took it onto herself. And she broke the rules, right? Like if that was one of my staff members right now, like there would be a lot of pressure for me to fire that person, right? Like, and I lived that. If I wouldn't have had that, I wouldn't have made it. And so, yeah, the people out there doing this work, it is thankless. Sometimes the youth are even like telling you, like they're that you ruined their life, and like, but at the end of the day, if we don't have those people doing that, the pain is going to be so much worse.
Yeah. We have thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of young people who are like living underground because they live in this gray area where, there's red tape all over the things that you really want to do. And sometimes in order to make you safe, social workers, they have to do things that might not be part of policy. Heroes in your life, they do things that might not be part of, social norms. How do you feel about a system where people have to literally bend the rules to make children safe sometime?
Yeah, and the system is clearly broken, and so what I like to do is I like to think about what can I do? What can an organization do? What can an individual do to directly change the broken places? If everyone who saw, because the system's so broken, it's like an elephant, right? That idea of, we're only seeing little parts of the same elephant.
Yep.
And it's the same way. If everyone who saw their broken part of the system stepped up and was like, we have to fix just this one part, just here in my city, just here in my community, I'm going to fix that one part. The system wouldn't be broken, right? But people get hopeless and apathetic, and I understand why. Like I understand why it's attractive to be apathetic. But
why? So I want you to unpack that before we go to break.
Sure. Because it's easy to be apathetic because if you've tried, you put your whole heart into something before. And we have all had these moments where we did our best to speak for someone who needed us to stand up for them. and maybe that person slams us down, the person we were speaking up for, or maybe it just doesn't work. Maybe the forces around us seem so big that who am I? It's like you have to have audacity to look at the world and say, I can be part of the solution. I can fix this. And if you don't have that audacity, then you can only default to being like, the system's broken. These young people are in pain, but what can I do about it?
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Martin Rafferty. This man has played no games about getting his life on a positive note and making a difference for others. We're going to talk more about that after a brief message. America's Next Motivator. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator. Hosted by me, Cedric Riley. Sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. Martin, what was the one thing that you decided to change in the system? And before you talk about that, if you can, explain for our viewership out there what the system is, because I've been in conversations where I'm talking about something that I'm thinking everybody knows about, and people have stopped me dead in my tracks and asked me, what is the system? I want you to answer that today.
Sure. So every state and every county and every city, there is funding to do the work of, when it comes to foster care, taking care of young people who the state has taken and stood up and said, we're taking you out of your home environment. It's abusive. It's not healthy. And so when they do that, they're now responsible for that young person. But systems evolve around every field. So there's a health and a mental health system. Every state has a health and a mental health system. And dollars come from the federal level, but dollars also come from the state. And so if there's a problem that your community is facing, homelessness, if it's facing the fact that young people are being recruited into gangs, there's some structure in place that is trying to deal with that. Now, how effective those structures are, that's up for debate, but every county has some structure, and that's what I would call the system. There are lots of different divisions of that as well, although.
Okay. And you said that you took it upon yourself to change at least one aspect of the system. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, and ironically, my work, if you can imagine the story that I just told, and you can sum up who I was until I got adopted. My biological family would call it kidnapped, right? But when I got adopted, up until that, if you could put my life story into one category, it would be system weary. System weary. I was avoidant of the systems, right? And there's a lot of reasons for people to be wary of systems. And so I wanted to look specifically at that, is that how can we reach families and young people who are weary of traditional systems? Mm-hmm. And the way I decided that we could best do that was with peer support.
Peer support.
Yes. So when you think about the idea of, let's say that right now on camera, you faint and you wake up in a few days in a hospital, and there's a doctor there, and he's like, you're type 2 diabetic. Mm-hmm. And you're going to need to inject yourself with insulin 4 times a day for the rest of your life. And if you don't, we're going to have to cut your foot off. Right. And by the way, you can't eat the foods you want. Like, so, and it gets worse and worse as long as the doctor's talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of peer support is, what if you have someone who had been there 10 years before? They had woken up in that bed like you did, and they have made it over, and like type 2 diabetes isn't like this thing that rules their life anymore. And so there's someone who's overcome it and know where you've been. And so the way that they can talk to you, the way that they can reach you is unlike what a doctor can do, right? And so that's a broad kind of way that I like to explain what peer support is. When it comes to youth peer support, we find young adults who have gone through the system. They're young adults, meaning they're not youth anymore, so they're 18 or older, and we train them on HIPAA, which is keeping privacy and knowing how to keep confidentiality, and we train them on how they can help youth who are going through the mental health system navigate resources and ultimately make it through to the other side.
When you say that you get them as early as 18, what's the age cutoff?
That's a great question. You know, we've had a 37-year-old as a peer support specialist. That was a very rare thing. We don't really set an age because there are what I call unicorns out there. The function of peer support is having lived experience. So if you've had lived experience and you can help someone, this was a vet, this person who we hired who is a little bit older, they had some lived experience that younger adults wouldn't have. But I would say on average, our average age of peer support specialist is about 21, 22.
Okay. All right. And yeah, I asked that because there are those unicorns out there who young people would be extremely they would encumber a lot of value upon
Yes.
a lot of young people out there, and so I just wanted to make some room for them too. But before we're going to get more into your organization, but to wrap up, you finished high school, and then after that, did you go to college?
So I didn't go to college.
Okay.
No, I did go to college, but like for like 3 semesters.
Okay.
So actually, before I left high school, I actually got my first directorship. So at the age of 16,
Wow.
I was the assistant director of a nonprofit, a $300,000 a year budget. So
Yeah.
not a huge nonprofit, but a okay size for our city, right? And I was the assistant director of that program for about 2 years before I went and joined the Merchant Marines.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you essentially got involved in your passion before you could even finish your degree, and your world opened up, and you saw an avenue for yourself in that world of making a difference.
Yeah, I was really excited about college because I didn't understand it. So sometimes we're excited about things and then we see the reality and we're like, whoa, that's not what I thought it was going to be. Mm-hmm. I remember I one of my first papers ever, poured my heart out to it. Like, I worked so hard on this paper, and when I went to turn it in, my professor, like kind of like marked all of like you didn't use this right font, you didn't use these right margins. And I understand now, the whole point is like, listen, the world is going to want you to know how to conform to structures that they need you to conform to. And so here at college, we're going to teach you how to do that. But the thing that I missed, and I think that this is a problem back then, maybe it's still a problem, is like, they were not very holistic about like, wow, the points that you made here are excellent. And if you don't fix these problems, the paper's not going to get the grade it deserves, right? If they would have said that to me, I would have heard it very differently. But I remember going home with that paper and going like, I could pour this energy into writing grants to get money to help other young people who have gone through the stuff that I went through. I'm not going to waste my time making make-believe papers, right? That don't do anything. And so, yeah, I started fundraising and I started doing curriculum design.
Yeah. I mean, I've got fireworks going off in my brain right now because I went through the same experience that you've gone through. And you start thinking about a value versus time exchange, where it's like I've discovered that thousands of young people need their life to be a better thing. And I want to join that fight. I want to be a soldier in that fight. And, because, if I'm Martin, I'm thinking, okay, I'm 18 years old. I'm in college. That's great. But I know for a fact there's an 11-year-old out there sleeping under a bridge somewhere. And I want to do something to help that 11-year-old out there. And it seems like everybody in the bigger world, they don't necessarily know what it is that you're passionate about. They don't really exactly understand. And so you take a specific interest and you uphold it and you pursue it. You pursue it. What would you say to a young person out there who has a dream in mind, they have a passion in mind, but they're scared to pursue it?
I'd say that you'll be shocked at how easy it ends up being. And I say ends up because that's very specific, because early on I fumbled, right? I fumbled the ball way too many times, right?
Yep.
But when you fail, you don't stop.
Okay.
When you fail, you lean in further and you try harder. And then eventually what happens is that you win and you figure it out, like, wait, why did this win and the 10 other times before not succeed?
Mm-hmm.
And you start understanding what success looks like, and you start building on that, and it ends up becoming a lot easier than those beginning phases. So I would tell them, don't give up because it seems really hard right now. It actually gets much easier as you figure out what works. But that's not very obvious. It wasn't obvious to me at the beginning.
Right. You have to do analysis on yourself constantly, and you have to pretty much make yourself into a case study. And you have to sort of start with one thing that makes sense and add ideas onto that thing that makes sense until you have an entire idea, a whole conversation about who you are and where you're going, right?
Yeah. The world, and I think this is a universal truth, the world applauds energy. So if you bring a lot of energy to whatever it is you're doing, because maybe you're not doing, you're not starting a nonprofit like I did. Maybe you're doing something else. Maybe you're trying to start a business. Or if you bring enough energy, even if you fail, that energy will keep you in the right momentum moving forward. And the world responds to energy. You bring the energy, and before long, you're going to get a door opened, and then another, and then another.
Okay. And so for you actually created a nonprofit. What's it called?
Youth Era.
Okay, Youth Era. That's a strong name.
It's a testament to a time that we feel has been coming for a long time, where that youth voice isn't some kind of thing that's tokenized or seen as a talking point, but it is a reality that this is a time in which we need to hear youth voice inside of systems and make systems better based on their voice.
Right. What are some ways that you all have enabled youth's voice to be heard?
Sure. So, we started in 2009, and a lot of the work in the early days was around creating like the Youth Mental Health Bill of Rights. We partnered with the university to create that. That went on to foster there were Youth Foster Bill of Rights and lots of different documents like that. But we also started to teach organizations. One of the first bills we ever paid as an organization was to our lawyer, because we had a letter drafted from him talking about why youth under the age of 18 could serve on board of directors, right?
Okay.
And so from very early on, we wanted to teach systems how to utilize youth voice. It seems simple, but it's not. It's complicated. We've worked with small city councils where they had a youth smear council. Then it's like, we tried to get these youth here, they didn't come, and it's like, you guys have no public transportation, right? And they're like, right. Did you ever talk about how they're gonna get there, because they can't drive yet, right? And they're like, oh yeah. And so sometimes it's a small tweak like that they can make. And so the will of getting youth voice is there, but there wasn't a model or a group that was coming and willing to like do the boots on the ground kind of work to enable it.
What is the value of having youth voice when it comes to developing policies and understanding what's going on in the system?
So I love because Kentucky is filled with conservatives, and so I have some of that in my blood. And so whenever I'm talking about social work and social issues, I like to think that I'm speaking to some conservative people as well. And so what I would say about like the power of youth voice is like, forget about how nice it is, right? Like, let's look at Pepsi and Coke. When they are testing their drinks and their beverages, they bring on consumers to see, for taste tests, to see how they respond to branding and marketing. When you look at corporate structures and see that they intuitively know that to make more money, they need to have test audiences for movies and product reviewers and taste testers for food and beverages. There's nothing nice about that. That's about the bottom line. So in social services, we can look at the corporate world and take lessons learned. And so how else are you going to make your system better? You bring in the people who are currently going through it and you ask them how you can make the services better. And then you try it. And some of the things will work and some of the things will need to be tweaked. But it's not super complicated to ask, but I think people get a little nervous about asking that question.
Right. Do you guys have a group of youth that you currently work with?
Every part of our organization works with youth voice, from when we do graphic design. So if you go to like our Facebook page, you'll see that like our videos and our graphics are like really on point. And it's like, we don't see media design as advertising. We see it as outreach, right? We think organizations need to think about that, but like you don't need to put money into doing ads. You need to put money into doing outreach. And so even with that, we have, if we don't, with almost all of the work that we do, we have a young adult designer, or at least young adults who are telling us what they like and what they don't like.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And do you all partner with other agencies? I know that some, if not all agencies, most agencies are realizing that they need to have some level of youth voice in their policy making process. So do you all partner with other organizations as well?
Absolutely, all the time. And we will provide technical assistance. Okay. Or we'll create tools that we'll send out for folks to use for free. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's one of the things that we do is we do this work all across the country. And so if organizations, if they don't have a budget and they're like, we can't afford technical assistance, it's like, all right, come and ask us. We have stuff for free for you. And then if there are organizations that are like, we have this big grant, it's a federal grant, and they need us to do this, but we don't know how, it's like, we can partner with you as well.
What would you say to a young person who is in the system and he feels like his or her voice doesn't need to be heard, or they feel like his or her voice, there's no story there? Mm-hmm. What would you say to them?
That come and join us, like, and not Youth Era necessarily, but you can come and join Youth Era. We'd love to have you, but like, come and join your peers, people who've gone through that. Like, there are people out there that are waiting for you to reach out and to show up and use your voice. And it might it might take a moment to find that person, and you might have a few doors closed on you, but they are out there.
Wow. So there's no such thing as a voice that you can't use, in a sense.
Correct. And the idea there is that there's such a shortage of people using their voice. I mean,
wow.
There really is. The councils and meetings and I get more calls about having a problem, getting those voices, rather than having youth call and say there's no one wants to hear my voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but again, it's about having the audacity. Like, you have something to say, like, your voice is valuable. That's not a talking point or like something to make you feel good. It's a fact.
It's a fact.
It's a fact, and apathy is the enemy of that, right? Apathy tells you your voice doesn't matter, and like, that's weak. That's weakness. Apathy is weakness. It's a weakness we all fall into, but you have to choose to fight apathy every day. I still have to choose to fight apathy every day.
Mm-hmm. And for those of us who might not know what apathy is, because one thing, I'm gonna tell you something about myself, Martin. I grew up in the foster care system as well. I spent 8.5 years of my life in foster care before my life was forever changed by adoption. And so I became somebody who shares my story of foster care as well. And I look forward to potentially working with you in the future. But many times along the way, people have stopped me mid-conversation and said, I don't understand what you're talking about. I don't understand the word apathy. You keep using this word apathy, and I don't know what apathy means. And so I've learned to sometimes stop and break down words just to make sure that we are beyond reproach. But for those of us who might not understand what apathy is lack of willingness to be compassionate about something. It's lack of willingness to care. And it's actually listed as a mental disorder. And so not caring about young people whose lives are in the balance, not caring about a little 11-year-old who's homeless living under a bridge right now, not caring about young people walking around with bruises on their face and their backs is not okay. Apathy is not okay. And we need to attach a sense of urgency to making the child welfare system in all its parts a better thing. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's going to take so many more of us, right? And like, people out there that are listening and feel like they have nowhere to go with their voice. It's like, we need you on these front lines. We need you talking on these front lines. Wow. There's a lot of commotion happening in the streets right now. There should be that commotion. Yeah. And there's more needed, right? There needs to be that kind of commotion for what's happening to the children in this country. We need to put their safety and health at the forefront. It used to be in our society that the safety of all of America's children was one of the four most important things. And something's happened in the last few decades, and it's gone, that's not true anymore. And it's like, we need all of you to come to these battle lines and say, this isn't acceptable. We have to change it now.
Now, what was your greatest success as a nonprofit youth there? I want you to talk about your greatest success for us, please.
I would say if I was trying to build hype, because I have a personal one, but the organizational hype thing, I would say it just happened a few months ago. We just completed Oxford University studied one of our programs that we put together. We worked with 100 youth from England, or actually a few different countries from the UK, and the research has come back and it was found to be very effective. And so that's just huge, because you could know that the work is having a good impact, but to have it studied and researched, mm-hmm. and the researchers come back and say, yes, your work is having a positive impact, that felt great.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Martin Rafferty from Youth Era today. Martin, we have 3 final questions, and time has flown by.
Yeah.
But I need you to answer these 3 questions for our viewers now and the future, and we have about 48 seconds. First one is, what is survival to you?
Never giving up.
What is success to you?
Success to me is being able to sit with yourself and be satisfied about the effort that you put in.
What is greatness to you?
Greatness is something that happens when you've shown up, you've done everything you can, others have as well, and you can see that in front of you, physically in front of you, right? And maybe how you see it is on a report or a young person telling you that they changed your life, like that. That's what